Well, welcome everyone to our space tech session titled In Orbit and Delivering, and it sure is delivering in many ways, and we're going to hear about that during this session. My name is Doug Johnson. I'm with the Consumer Technology Association. Again, welcome to you joining us this afternoon here at CES. I've got a great lineup of speakers here, and our biggest challenge will be the limitation on time because there's a lot of interesting things to talk about as we discuss space tech. But let me introduce our panelists briefly, and then we'll go right into some questions I've prepared to ask them. So first, to my right is Steve Wood. He's Senior Director at Maxar Technologies. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you.
To Steve's right is Shalini Bhatia. She is Principal and Practice Leader at Deloitte Consulting. Welcome as well. Next to her right is Mark Mozina. He's Vice President of Government Affairs at Planet. And to Mark's right is Jonathan Hofeller. He's Vice President of Starlink Commercial Sales at SpaceX. Welcome, Jonathan. So again, thank you to all of you for being here, and we'll jump right in. And of course, when we're talking about satellites in low Earth orbit and amazing new ways of communicating and getting imagery, we may remember what that has meant to Ukraine in particular, and the coverage we've seen over the past year. So maybe I'll start with Ukraine, which of course has been dominating headlines here and around the world. Some of your companies have played some role in the information we've learned about the conflict. Maybe you can tell us, starting with you, Steve, about your efforts in this regard and what role Maxar has played in this particular conflict, and we'll certainly go on from there.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. I was actually thinking about this yesterday. I was flying on a plane coming from Denver, which is where our company is headquartered, right outside of the Denver area. And I was thinking, as we were just getting ready to release a new set of images from our satellites showing damage in one of the eastern Ukraine cities called Bakhmut. And if you've been following the news on activities in Ukraine, this is a town that has been under siege for 6 months. And when we released the images yesterday to the news media, which is part of what we do, is the imagery showed to me what looked like World War I type of photography. Just craters everywhere in the fields, buildings damaged, infrastructure damaged, and to be able to capture that, in our case, from space, at the resolution and the detail, and to be able to share it openly in an unclassified way, has been core of what we've been doing for the past year. We're rapidly getting to a year anniversary in the war in Ukraine, which is kind of staggering to think about. And it's just been a constant flow of information. And I think all of us on the panel represent aspects of that have been happening this year, in this past year, of being able to take information, very high technology, and to be able to share it, and to be able to show with transparency what's been happening. And I think this has been unprecedented in the history of conflict, and the type of technologies that we have, and what you're seeing has really been a kind of a proof point to that.
Thank you, and I'll go all the way to the other end to Jonathan. Of course, there's been imagery and then there's been connectivity. Broadband connections have meant a lot in this conflict. Please tell us about the role your company has played.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, move the mic closer there.
For having me. Yeah, to complement what my colleague here said, you know, you're collecting imagery, collecting data, but getting it to the ground and then sharing that information is critical. In Ukraine and across all disasters, what we've been seeing is that when people come, say, out of a disaster or in the midst of it, the first thing that they ask for is not food, not water, but connectivity. They're looking to call loved ones. They're looking to connect and get supplies. They're looking to do all sorts of aspects of connectivity that are required to keep things moving forward in recovery. So to date, I think we've deployed something around 25,000 units to Ukraine through various aspects. That impact, you know, people have been very vocal about the impact that's had and the positive effect that it's had on the communities there. If you shut down, and Russia was very adamant on shutting down communications as an offensive tactic, but having connectivity is critical, and having resilient connectivity. So what's the beauty of our system is that you can, with the dish, and some of you have seen it, you literally plug it in. the only requirement is plug it in. Plug it in and has to have a clear view of the sky, and you are connected to the internet. And so that simplicity has been key in being able to provide connectivity when things get disrupted, moving that connectivity. We have connectivity on the move as well. And so our architecture, which is founded in a low Earth orbit constellation, looks at, we have well over 3,500 satellites on orbit as we speak, is resilient in the sense that you have a ground terminal and you can actually talk and see to dozens of satellites at any given point. So having that as a feature allows you to have a much more robust connectivity architecture.
It's actually really interesting because you start to look at what we've learned from these conflict situations and the power of imagery and the power of connectivity and the benefit that it's given to individuals and governments alike. And there's actually a flip side of it. You know, there's the utopian view is that geo in singularity means we all have better information quicker to be able to make the right decisions for the better good. Unfortunately, the dystopian view is that that can all be misused in lots of different ways. And so part of that is what will be the next front for war? Is it cyber in space? And we've seen instances of this, right? We've seen instances of shutting down of SATCOM. We've seen instances of jamming of satellites. And so I think as we look ahead to what this means, there is a greater need for the right governing and the right protection, the right cyber defense mechanisms to not let that dystopian view come to life.
So is it right to think of low Earth orbit satellites providing these services as critical infrastructure that needs to be protected?
Absolutely. And you know, as Deloitte, as a consulting firm, we work with governments and institutions alike, and a big part of that focus is around creating that right cyber defense mechanisms so that things like that can be avoided in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Building on the Ukraine,
please.
just for Planet, Planet's been very active. So Planet, for those of you who don't know, we're the largest remote sensing constellation in orbit. So we have 250 satellites that image every road, building, tree in the world every day. So everywhere you've ever been, we have a new image of it every day. And so in the Ukraine, we're looking not only where we know we need to look, such as cities that are currently under attack, or looking at an impact crater that just happened, or a new explosion, or an airbase strike. We're also looking at places we did not know we needed to look. But then in the future, when we find out that it's an important area, you can rewind time and you can watch an event unfold. And so what we're seeing in the Ukraine, as has been pointed out already, is this is the first time as a world we're watching events unfold in a war zone from space in near real time. So every day we're seeing lines moving, we're seeing attacks, where, as an example, February 14th of last year, right before the invasion, if you recall, Putin said he was pulling out 60,000 troops from Belarus. February 15th in the morning, we got a ping automatically within our system that a road had showed up in the middle of a river in Belarus. Well, a road and a river is a computer's way of saying a bridge. And so they built a bridge overnight, just a few kilometers away from the border with Ukraine, and that flagged for other assets, classified assets, as well as unclassified assets like Maxar, like our we also have high resolution as well, so does other companies like Black Sky and International. That flagged it, so it identified a needle in a haystack. We did not know to look at that river, but because we were looking everywhere, we found it. That flagged other assets to take a look, and by that news cycle, less than 24 hours after they said they were withdrawing their troops from Belarus, there were images of Russian tanks moving across a river towards Ukraine. And of course, the invasion happened shortly thereafter. So that brought truth to power in near real time that all of us could see on the news of, well, that's not happening, and you can watch it happen. And similarly, not only around troop movements, but also you can look at the grain. Ukraine is a breadbasket, so looking at the grain stability, looking at the crop yields, looking what's happening with that, estimating what those yields are going to be, watching what's happening to it. All of that is not only food security for Ukraine, it's food security for the world, because Ukrainian grain historically goes to North Africa, it goes to Southeast Asia. So anyways, there's a number of these examples where by providing this data, providing this imagery, unclassified and open to the world, we're able to get insights that enable better decision making in near real time.
Yeah, that transparency is an advantage and a distinction because, of course, governments have satellites for reconnaissance, but they're not flipping the imagery to the public right away. So that is an important distinction. Shalini, I want to ask you, your firm works with a number of, and you and your practice group with a number of firms in this sector. What about the connection to consumers? I mean, certainly it's helping communities and individuals, but can you talk to us a little bit more about the B2C aspect of this side of commercial space?
You know, it's really, really interesting. So when you think of the benefit that imagery gives you, to really make that come to life, you need imagery, you need data processing at scale, you need the AI ML that sits on top of that, and then you need it all aligned to industry use cases. And all of that ultimately translates into a benefit to the end customer. Usually it manifests in the form of cost, efficiency, or experience, right? And so from a B2C standpoint, I would say the benefits are more derived in the form of that cost, efficiency, and experience. So think about insurance as an example. And this is work that we as Deloitte have done in the past, is having the right imagery and having the AI ML layer on top means you can look at the impact of climate crisis very quickly without having to have somebody go in after the fact, 2 months after the thing is over, and manually inspect it. Well, what that means for the consumer is that there is a quicker insurance payout, a quicker solutioning of what has happened. And so from a B2C standpoint, the benefits are derived from supply chain resilience, they're derived from, climate issues, from catastrophe issues, and it's derived from insurance as an example. Now, when we start to expand the scope of that and you start to think of the benefits that SATCOM provides on top of that, to me, SATCOM is, again, at its core, it's where connectivity in a secure way meets processing at the edge, meets the AI ML capabilities, and is aligned to industry-specific use cases, again. And this is where it starts to get pretty exponential. Because at its core, what you can do is quickly connect those that are underconnected, i.e. underserved. That in itself then starts to open up a plethora of use cases. At Deloitte, we have a concept called future of industry issues, future of health, future of connectivity, et cetera. And so you start to think about what these things together can do for those future of issues. It is mind-blowing, right? So banking the unbanked, because they are now connected, they can. Of course, secure connection everywhere. Autonomous driving and the experience benefits that come from that. You start to go future of health, continuous predictive monitoring no matter where you are. And so you start to go industry by industry, and the number of opportunities that the number of new markets that you can create by bringing these things together is just significant.
So life-changing and life-improving for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, Steve, let me turn to you next, because I think, citizens in this country and countries around the world may not actually realize how often they're interacting with the products and services and benefits of companies like yours. So can you tell us a little bit more about how your company's technology is interacting with consumers, maybe in ways that they don't actually realize on a day-to-day basis, I guess particularly with news, but there are other ways too.
Right. No, I think it's one of those headlines that you often will see is our imagery is involved in the news and high current interest events, as we like to call them. But I was just thinking about in the last discussion we were just having, our industry, we think of it as the commercial imagery industry, and the whole idea is to be commercial. Not just a B2G or a business-to-business type of end customer set, but to really, the vision of it was from the very beginning is to make it accessible to people. I frankly challenge, I think all of us have had a long path in getting to that end point, and we're not fully there. It's still a complicated space technology type of business that's yet to get to that full commercial side, but we're getting there. And so to your point, to the question, if you look at your phone, how many times have you looked at, a mapping device where you're trying to figure out how do I get from point A to point B? Well, good chance that our satellite imagery was right on your phone as you're navigating from those points. Or you're looking at the value of your house and you wonder, or your neighbor's house. That base map is coming from satellites, most cases, not in all of them, but around the world, those type of products are now becoming ubiquitous. It's that current, very high-resolution view. And where we're starting to see a lot of this going is more into 3D. You know, we don't just see things in a two-dimensional view. How do you take, from a satellite perspective, and bring it in with that resolution, with the accuracy, and to put it in a three-dimensional kind of capability? That's where we really start seeing a lot of this fusion starting to happen. That really, I think, starts to get to the commercial aspect of what we all envisioned many, many years ago.
Thank you. Jonathan, back over to you, and back to connectivity. We started out talking about disaster areas and conflict areas and the importance of imagery and connectivity to people on the ground. And we started touching on use cases beyond that. Obviously, Starlink's constellation of satellites mean a lot to people who don't have access, broadband access in some parts of the world without conflict, and just simply don't have the infrastructure. So can you expand upon that a little bit and talk about how your company's addressing that and help educate us beyond, I guess, the conflict zones?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the conflict ones get a lot of attention. So to date, we have over 1 million users globally across 40-something countries, 45 countries, I think. But as we set out on this quest to connect the unconnected and the underconnected, it's amazing what we've seen over the last couple of years. Just to share some anecdotes from some of the stuff that I've worked on, even within the United States, there's huge pockets of people that are underconnected or not connected, and the pandemic certainly highlighted this. And you know, some of the feedback that I've got, we did a big push in some of the tribal nations, and where they were just not connected. And this could be, you know, very northern Canada, it could be in the middle of Arizona or Mexico. And one woman came up to me and she says, you know, thank you. He's like, I thought we were invisible to the world. And I'm like, that, for whatever, it just struck me pretty hard. It's like, nobody should be invisible to the world. You've given my family a chance to, you know, become educated, to kind of get out of this cycle of poverty. And we had another one, another tribe that said, you know, we were paddling upstream without a paddle, and there's no way we could have gotten out of this route if we don't have connectivity, we don't have education. So we do a lot in teleeducation, we do a lot in telehealth. During the pandemic, it was a big push. So what we're seeing is just connectivity is essential to modern day life, and to add on top of that, you know, satellite internet traditionally, you know, comes from geostationary orbit, which is 35,000 kilometers away. It takes roughly 600 milliseconds to get a signal there and back. And great technology, but as we move forward into the future where you have real-time video, where you want to have discussions and you want to have augmented reality and you have all these other applications, a low latency system is imperative. And so our system, like the other LEO systems that are here, we're much closer to Earth. We're equivalent to a latency of fiber. So what does that enable? That enables, video conferencing, gaming, you know, as I said, telehealth, teleeducation. And so this is where we believe our technology is critical. And the other great aspect, and I mentioned it before, but the ease of setup is we're deploying these things. They show up. I was speaking with someone earlier who says, like, it showed up on my doorstep. I plugged it in, and 5 minutes later, I had internet. You don't need a degree in rocket science or brain surgery. You literally plug it in, and I would say my mom could do it, but that's probably digging my mom. Sorry, Mom. Yeah, it really, you know, we're deploying in education, but the speed at which we can deploy. So the constellation is up there. It's working. It's global. And you know, as we've been building this over the last couple of years, there's been other disasters, and you know, we're very big on action. We're very big on quick response. So having us get on a plane with 100 Starlink terminals to go, you know, support the flooding in Louisiana, Hurricane Louisiana, flooding in Germany. Tonga had a huge tsunami. This was about a year ago, 2 years ago. Time is weird. Within, you know, several days, we had their whole island back up and running, and that's just a testament to satellite technology.
Thank you. And Mark, I want to go back to you because I'm intrigued or amazed really by this by what I've read and what I've heard from you about your constellation of satellites imaging the same areas repeatedly, I guess on almost on a daily basis, and then drawing, using analysis and then drawing conclusions from the changes that you see. I guess in one of those areas you're looking at agriculture, even though we might place connectivity above food, and some people do in parts of the world for sure. Food is still important, and farming is still important, and you're capturing images of these fields, and what has that meant for agriculture?
Yeah, one quick comment on the disasters
Please.
before agriculture. So connectivity in the disaster areas is very important, and from space for imaging, we also play a role, as you might suspect, in understanding the disasters, and by imaging before and after disasters, relief crews know which roads were there. Insurance companies use that to understand flooding. In a recent case in North India, there was, if you might remember, there was a landslide that created basically a water, not really a tsunami, but like a water pressure wave in a river that broke a bunch of dams and ended up flooding a bunch of villages. In Chamoli, we actually caught that. We just got lucky, and we caught that happening in real time, so that scientists could then backtrack out how that earthquake and landslide happened, and then they can try and understand in the future. So we play a role in these disaster areas, and we participate in the international agreements that when there is a natural disaster, we open up our data to emergency crews immediately. And so whether we're talking about fires or floods or hurricanes or blizzards or what have you, the data is available to emergency crews, and we help the local communities figure out how to use them, and we help the recovery teams backtrack the information out so that they can help in that process. In terms of agriculture, agriculture is our largest vertical. So traditionally, images from space were used by two main groups. It was used national security, so defense and intelligence, and it was used by scientists, so Landsat, Sentinel program, and weather and stuff like that. And that was it. But that is changing rapidly right now. And one of the areas where that's changing is ag. And so farmers are using the data, and large agricultural companies like Corteva and Bayer and others are using the data to understand crop yields. Because we image every field in the world every day, you can understand what the yields are going to be for every tomato plant in the world, or every corn harvest in the world, or what have you, whatever you're interested in. You can understand that. You can understand for an individual farmer, they can understand where they need to water more or less, understand pesticides. They can get in front of what their yields are going to be for markets. Food security is a big issue. We work with a lot of international groups. They try to understand what the food yields are going to be around the world, and then that would enable them to pre-position food to help with disasters of food shortages before they happen, so that you don't have to wait to read in the news that there's millions of people that don't have food right now. You can actually get the food there because you can see what the harvest will be from space months in advance. So, so agriculture is a big growth area for us. It's our largest single vertical, and as this was alluded to earlier with Maxar, as we get away from our traditional users, not only keep supporting science, keep supporting national security, but as we start to go into various businesses like infrastructure and supply chain, insurance companies, what have you, we're seeing more and more value coming from these constellations, this eye in the sky that allows you to make these better decisions in near real time.
Thank you. Doji, sure.
Yeah, if I could. Mark touched on a couple really important points, and I think it's something that really unites all of us here on this panel. You know, all of us represent companies that are trying to, of course, be profitable and to make money. But I think when we get involved in these crises around the world, and we've had our share of crises over the past, take your pick. It seems like every year there's something catastrophic that's been happening. I think it's kind of interesting and rewarding to see our companies are actually involved in helping too. So it's not just, you know, trying to get the stock price up on Wall Street, et cetera. It's deploying the Starlink terminals at a time of need. It's opening up our data through open data programs, letting people use the data as the way it was originally intended, to make it actually actionable and actually turn it into information that people can use for disaster response. You know, we've been going back for 20 years in the case of our company, and I'm often asked, you know, can you think of the most notable images that you've had? And we kind of gravitate back to those catastrophic events, you know, the Japanese earthquake and the tsunami, the volcano in Tonga, things like that. And it's that compulsion that we have, and I think all of us have here on the panel, to try and help, and to do what we can to actually take the technology and make it become actionable for people.
Thank you. Good point, and actually a good segue in a sense too, because to get all those important and life-saving and life-changing benefits from imagery and connectivity, it does take money. It does take capital markets. And Shalini, I wanted, maybe you can help educate the audience about the role of the capital markets enabling the commercialization of space, and by extension, all the things we're hearing about.
Absolutely. I do want to echo everything that Steve just said, because again, the utopian view of this space is the single innovation that I think we'll see for many decades that can radically change things, that can radically protect humanity, that can drives clarity to difficult situations. We all have to together be careful of the dystopian view, and through regulations, through the decisions and choices that we are all making, create a view that a world, that a space world that is resilient and secure and safe. Back to the capital markets question though. So it is interesting because there are three things that I think really drive the economic activity here. This is an industry that benefits from, obviously needs a lot of capital intensive industry, benefits a lot from scale. Scale drives economics, as many of you may have been following. The cost to launch, operate, manufacture has all dipped significantly over the last decade. And then finally, this is an industry that requires a lot of innovation. And so when you put those three things together, that makes it very ripe for investment. So if you look at private investing trends over the last 10 years, they have increased 10x. In 2021, there was about $40 billion of private investing. There were 600 rounds of investment. So we start to look at this and then say, well, what do we expect to see in the future? And I think that that trend in investing is going to continue, but potentially shift a little bit as well. And by that I mean, while a lot of the investment in the past has been focused on more traditional businesses, you look at the subsectors in the market, SATCOM, SatNav, data and analysis related to imagery, that is where the most significant share of the market is in the future. And therefore, I think we'll start to see a shift from investing in some of the more traditional businesses to investing in these downstream businesses that hold a greater share of the market. I think we'll also see more PE activity. December was a very interesting month with two very large deals. And so I think we'll see more and more of that. And then I think we'll see a shift from PEs that have historically been more aerospace and defense focused PEs to PEs that are more active in the tech, media, and telco space. There are 1,000+ companies focused on GeoInt today. There are a few leaders.
GeoInt meaning geointelligence of all types, imagery,
That's right.
Okay.
But there are a few leaders. There's a long tail of companies here that are all going to need capital, that all have some assets, that potentially can combine and empower another company to do things differently or better. All of that is going to spur consolidation as well. So I think we'll see more private investing. I think we'll see some shifts in the nature of that private investing, and I think we'll see more consolidation.
Okay. Well, I'm picking up again on the beneficiaries of these satellites and the services. I want to go over to Jonathan again and ask from his perspective what he thinks the which industries stand to gain the most from broadband connectivity as enabled by low Earth orbit satellites.
Yep. So one thing that our leadership definitely drives home consistently is impact. Where can we have the greatest amount of impact, positive impact for a better future? We are getting into a lot of different markets. Certainly there's the consumer side of the business. And analog to that is the education and some of the telehealth, the stuff that I talked about before. But something a little closer to home, aviation is a big market where we're coming soon to an airline near you. You're going to have free Wi-Fi. You walk on the plane, the internet just works. And so that's something that we already have several deals underway for that. The cruise ships have all upgraded their internet. So anywhere where you go where you previously either had really bad internet or had to pay a lot for internet, hopefully that is going away. But one of the big things that, at least this year, that we're looking at is agriculture. Completely unrelated, but related, is precision farming. How do they get that information out real time and make smarter decisions for better yields and just that sort of optimization? And then the other big push for us is cellular backhaul. So we have a lot of partnerships with the telephone companies that, they have to make money too. And at some point there's a line where they will not put in a cell phone tower out in the middle of nowhere because there's not a return for them. It's too expensive to dig fiber and to trench out into the middle of nowhere. So we offer a great complement to that, as we can support connectivity. Well, they'll go out and they'll support all their residents and their communities, and they'll backhaul it through us. And so we have a big development push, a huge impact, one we've been public about in Indonesia. We recently released our backhaul in Japan. And so our technology is enabling that backhaul, which will ultimately connect a lot more remote people.
Thank you. Mark, I want to go back to you because a few minutes ago you were talking about how your satellites will have this significance of being able, and distinction from government satellites, of being able to deliver imagery instantly and commercially and to the public right away. How do you see you're looking at it from another standpoint? How are you complementing national security imagery? Because that's the kind of imagery we don't see publicly, certainly not right away. So what about going back in that direction? Are you complementing? Are you sharing up that direction as well? Tell us about that relationship a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah, national security is one of the traditional users, as you might imagine, for the last 60 years, since the 1960s when the world started having satellites, or casually spy satellites, what have you. So national security was one of the first users, and they remain a large customer, both domestically as well as internationally. Often, national security assets focus on extreme resolution or unique capabilities. What a commercial market focuses on is where do you have commercial viability. So we're focusing on medium resolution to high resolution. We're actually we're regulated at what that resolution can be. So we're not crossing over into classified areas, but we complement them significantly because we see the world. While their systems may be extremely good soda straws at areas of interest, extremely good capabilities where they know they need to look, what commercial systems are doing today and continue to do is find the needle in the haystack, scan the whole planet, use machine learning and AI, figure out what changed, what you care about in the areas, and then flag it. Flag it for other assets, be they other space assets, be they ground assets, be they aerial, be they drone, what have you. Flag it as something changed here, go take a look. So we are finding the needles in the haystack that then enable other government assets to be more purposeful in how they're used and therefore be more effective. So there's a strong complement factor there. There's a new program that has started up, which Maxar is a part of, and Planet's a part of, and Black Sky's a part of, called EOCL, the Electro-Optical Commercial Layer. That's just the name of the program. That's a program that brings in commercial data into the government national security apparatus and allows them to use that as part of their mission needs.
Yeah, please.
If I could, yeah, I fully agree. I think it's also really important to understand, again, since the very beginning of this industry in the commercial space, the central tenet was going to be that this imagery could be shared and that it'd be unclassified. That is different, very much like you mentioned, on the government side. There's a lot of hoops and hurdles you have to jump through to get an image that is normally going to be considered secret or classified or higher to then be declassified and shared. So you think back to 8 years ago when Russia did this one more time and they invaded Crimea. Again, it was commercial satellite imagery that was able to be shared with NATO, with the world, to start documenting what was happening, to go full circle to where we are today. And so, very much like we've been saying, it's this synergy between government and industry to take data that would normally not be able to be shared. And that has been one of the real central components of commercial satellite imagery, really since its inception and the birthplace, really back in 1992 when we got our first license for it.
Well, thank you. I want to turn to the audience in a couple of minutes. If there are any questions out there, please have them in mind. And in the last 3 or 4 minutes here, we'll try to tackle 1 or 2 of them. I've got one more for the panel right down the line. Being at CES, of course, we want to know what's around the corner, what's yet to come, what the future holds. to the extent you can you share with us what kinds of services or capabilities are just around the corner, what we might expect from your networks of satellites providing this imagery and providing this connectivity? Can you foretell us anything in that regard?
Well, from my company standpoint, certainly we're going to Mars, so that's exciting. Probably a little less exciting. So yeah, Starlink, the technology, we're going to continue to drive down the cost, continue to make the size smaller, continue to make the throughput larger, just opening up that to more and more people. Certainly the cost limits adoption, and throughput limits the capabilities. And what's going to be great is to see what people do with this technology as we get it smaller, more mobile, and yeah, we're going to continue launching more satellites.
Mark?
I mean, speaking for Planet, Planet from the very beginning took the approach of a cell phone for satellites. We don't, traditionally, satellites take years to build. They're designed to operate for a decade or more, and they're very expensive, and then they're expensive to launch. But thanks to advances in this conference, basically, and advances in launch costs, thanks to the person sitting to the right, as well as that whole industry, launch costs have dropped significantly, and so it's much cheaper to get things into space, and electronics have become much more effective. So our approach as a company has always been, we don't need to design something to last for 2 decades. Let's design it. All of our satellites are designed for 5 years, and we just replace them constantly. So we're iterating. It's like your iPhone or your Google phone or what have you, your Pixel in your wallet. Very few of you in this room probably have a phone that's more than 3 years old in their pocket. Everyone is replacing their phones every 2 to 3 years. We replace our satellites every 2 to 3 years. So we just had a successful launch, thank you, on Tuesday, where several dozen satellites went up, so making our constellation now 250 satellites. And every time we launch, they're like your phones, they iterate to become better and better. So what's the future for us? We continue that iterative process. Every time we launch, a third of our fleet every year. Every 3 years, the whole fleet's been replaced with the latest and greatest. Where this year we'll be launching 2 new constellations. One is high resolution called Pelican. So they're about that big, and they will be launching. So they'll be a higher resolution than our current high resolution, and we'll be launching a constellation of them. And then a new type of satellite will be launching at the end of this year, which we're very excited about. It's hyperspectral. So as opposed to just a handful of bands and colors that we currently have, that most optical satellites currently have, this will be 420 bands. And its initial mission is aimed at point source detection of greenhouse gases. So around the world, you will be able to identify to the building or the pipeline or the factory or what have you, where the methane is coming from, where the carbon dioxide is coming from. So that'll help companies figure out where their leak is, because methane is worth money, so they can plug it up, figure out where. It'll help regulators enforce regulations about pollution like that. And it'll help, in general, which is the goal of our company, it'll help communities, individuals, and countries and companies make better choices. And so by having that data available, public, unclassified, and out in the world so that people can have access to it, that'll be very exciting as we get greenhouse gases out in the world, so we can actually, as a community, you can one day look up, well, where are the polluters in my neighborhood? Where's the methane coming from? And you could see by the building.
I think space is going to disrupt everything. It's the combination of SATCOM and imagery that I think will really make a change. So starting from the very basics, the ability to connect anything and everything, anywhere and everywhere, which leads to all the better experiences, Jonathan, that you were talking about, lower latency, higher throughput, et cetera. Take that and add to that the solving of actual business challenges that we cannot solve today, provision of proactive monitoring of healthcare, banking the unbanked, insurance, city planning, the ability to collect imagery from satellites with data you get from connected, always connected IoT devices to create a better city experience. I think it's going to change everything. what's interesting as we work with clients across industries, and actually you can YouTube this, our chief futurist talks about 5 worlds, one of which is the space world, and we go industry by industry and start to work through what the impact is. Every single industry has started to see that they're either going to be a consumer or a purveyor of space capabilities.
Thank you. Steve, you'll get a final word.
Okay,
here.
I'll wrap it up. We're moving again back into space. So as I've been in the company for 22 years, and every year we're building and getting ready to send up more satellites into space, and that's true right now. We'll be launching our next generation system very much the way Mark described with their new systems coming. Ours are coming this year, called Worldview Legion. These will be very, very capable satellites. And that's, again, part of this trend that I think we're all part of. More satellites, more capabilities, more technology into space. For us, we're not just Earth intelligence type of systems. We're also in building satellites, the actual hardware, Sirius XM type of satellites, communications birds. We're going to the moon. Not us directly, but we're helping out with the Artemis mission. It's a big part of our company that we often don't talk as much about compared to the pictures that we're seeing. But I think all of those are very, very exciting. And then a little bit more, relevant to where we are today at CES, we see this 3D, this digital twin of the Earth continuing to grow and grow, and to be starting to be fused into things like gaming, into virtual realities, being able to look at a movie and film, using a 3D capability that's accurate without sending a crew there. Just walk around the floor. You start to kind of envision how this can all come together, and to do it remotely from hundreds of miles up in space.
Well, as a friend of mine is apt to say, space is where it's at, and I hope you've gotten a good sense of that. I had wanted to go to the audience. Maybe our panelists can be available for a couple of minutes after we conclude here, because I need to conclude on time. But I want to conclude by thanking each of you for your comments and your insights and your participation. 40 minutes I knew would go by fast. Thank you, audience, for your attention and your attendance, and let's give them a round of applause. Thanks again.